and realised that we were both sort of connected to a couple of really interesting food land mapping projects. Janie, a very sort of localised one, sort of very community engaged project in Lambeth in London with Arup for Incredible Edible Lambeth, and they gave a really good presentation of their scheme last time we met. And then in the north, it was Mark, who's with us as well today, and Rachel talking about their project in Lancaster, using the Hope Spots methodology, which was developed by Mark and Mary, who's also here from Friends of the Earth. And so it was that identifying that there seems to be a growing need to map food land, existing and potential, and all of the layers that involves about ownership and need and soil and food poverty, to inform, as a really important piece to inform food strategies and action towards transitioning the food system. So this is the second time that we've got everyone together, and Mark will be giving us an update on where they've got to with the Hope Spots work in Lancaster, which is brilliant. And Dan from Cranfield University is also here, which is great. And we, through a really good chat we had, he talked about a land mapping project that he will be working on in Newcastle, which is more around neglected land. And Dan is a soil scientist, so it's thinking about food and soils as a potential, way of transforming neglected land. Oh, Julian, nice to see you. Great that you're here.
Hi there. Keeping my video off due to low bandwidth for now, but hi, good to see you.
Yeah, so we hear from Mark and Dan today, and it's also that we're talking about it's about kind of creating opportunities for more mapping to be done in different places, and understanding what the needs are, where the needs are for food land mapping, and how mappers might step in to meet those needs. It's also about how do we harmonise the different approaches, or how do we look at the different characteristics of different approaches and methodologies, and what are their strengths and how are they appropriate to different settings and scenarios and places. So it's the beginning of an exploration and hopefully bringing everyone together is a really good learning opportunity. Janie, do you want to add anything at this stage before we go into an opening?
I'd quite like to add a couple of things, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So as well as working with Incredible Edible Lambeth, I'm also working nationally with Incredible Edible, and there are two things going on there. One is that one of the directors is preparing a right to grow bill, which I mentioned last time, and that is coming along, and we'll share the draft with you. I can share that with you after this meeting. But one of the key parts of that, obviously, is that all local authorities will need to have mapped their land. Many of them have done that already, obviously, in order for a kind of traffic light system to be established, where if the land is marked green, then communities would have the opportunity to grow food or develop the land for biodiversity. And we're trying to doing it in a very unthreatening way, so that if a local authority has earmarked land for development, they just put a red dot on it and it's a non-starter. If it's negotiable, it'll be amber, obviously. So that's in development. And alongside that, I'm working, trying to work, because it's incredibly difficult, with the Church of England, and Maddie and I have been on a couple of calls about that. They too have done a mapping exercise, but it's complicated, and it seems that don't really know what the next diocese is doing. And we're trying to say, look, let's try and pull this all together, have a better sense of what land might be available for to be released. Doesn't need to be given, it's just to be loaned for food growing. So that's another element of the work that I'm pushing on, and talking to lots of different people within the church to try and get my head around the land ownership across the country. So those are two add-ons I wanted to just mention.
Thank you. Yeah, let's hold on to your questions for now. We'll do an opening round, and I think we'll hear from Mark and then Dan, and then we'll kind of bring in touch on some of the other strands and projects that are present, and yeah, plenty of time for questions as well. So we've got till 11:30. Should give us plenty of time for all of that. Yeah, let's just do a round and say how imagine we're sitting together in a circle in a space, and we'll just go and say how are we coming to this meeting, and briefly what our interest is in being here. So maybe Jeremy, do you want to start and then pass it on to the next person?
Hi, hello, hello to those of you I've not met before, virtually or otherwise, and hello to those I know. Okay, Mary, I met on the Declaration of Interest. We're playing music together in a proto-Ceilidh band in Bristol. So I was in her back garden the other day. Yeah, okay, I'm okay this morning. I got up, took the dog out, put the washing on the line, cut down some some overgrowth. And yeah, I'm listening in really today. Maddie and Janie have been taking this bit of work forward, and I'm aware of what's going on, but I like to listen in and keep abreast of stuff. Just a couple of comments. So in the last week, we've had the first of our Policy Influencers Network group meetings last Tuesday, and then
sorry, Jeremy, just to say, those of you who don't know, Jeremy and I coordinate the Urban Agriculture Consortium.
Sorry,
Jeremy is.
That's who I am. Long-standing environmental activist and campaigner. Yeah, that's probably who I am. Yeah, with this Policy Influencers Network proto meeting last week, which was really powerful, and then yesterday there was the Northern Real Farming Conference pre-event. And Fran, you did brilliantly. It was absolutely great. The whole atmosphere of the community of people working together, which we can claim a little bit of credit for, perhaps, was just really powerful, and I'm just really overwhelmed with it. And I think perhaps that's all I need to say is this community of which you're part is emerging at pace and with some sense of dynamism and purpose. And I think it's just really quite a powerful place to be at the moment.
Thank you, Jeremy. Anne-Marie, would you like to go next?
I'll unmute. Hello everyone. I am new. I know none of you. My name's Anne-Marie Pope. You may, if you were on the last call for this group, have met Alison Sheffield, who I'm currently maternity cover for. I'll try and keep myself brief. I'm sure you all know Gary Mitchell and Nick Perkins at Social Farms and Gardens. So I'm Alison's maternity cover on the Social Farms and Gardens Resilient Green Spaces Pan Wales project. So 6 work streams, one looking at renewing and creating up to 600 allotments and mapping around that. We've also been, Nick's leading that work stream, and she's been talking to Church in Wales and housing associations as well, and there is mapping as part of that. 5 food hubs with Open Food Network, Development Trust Association Wales and Landworkers Alliance, planting 1,000 trees in orchards across various sites across Wales, a Greener Verges project with Gwynedd Council, community access to farms project working with shared assets, and Colm, this is one of the meetings I spoke about in my email to you. Hi. We'll talk later. And a horticultural skills development work stream with Lantra and Land Workers Alliance. Very briefly, that is very briefly. But essentially the whole project is linking communities to green spaces. And a little bit about me, my background is mainly in arts and culture. So I worked for many years on festivals and events across all the creative industries in Birmingham, moved to advocacy in the Black Country, and have spent the last couple of years running a small museum in Wales. So well versed in Welsh government, but have been a part of my local community land trust and community energy group and allotments association here, and was delighted to get the opportunity to work on this project. And really great to hear Jeremy's excitement and enthusiasm. So I'm thrilled to be here, excited about our projects and your projects, and I'll probably keep silent for the rest of the meeting and just absorbed, because of mapping, I know not a lot.
Amazing, thanks Anne-Marie, it's lovely that you're here. Lots of mapping opportunities there. Fran, do you want to go next?
Right, yeah, I'm Fran in Sheffield. A little bit about my background. I spent 10 years working for myself as a landscape photographer, became increasingly interested in how I might change the world usefully, and my main interest being plants, food and trees. And then I went off to do a landscape architecture MA, which I also did in Sheffield. Since the start of this year, I've been Chef Foods, so Sheffield Food Partnerships, urban agriculture coordinator, which is a new role. So yeah, figuring out still everything that's part of that. I've got a particular interest in land and equitable access to land, always have done a lot of trespassing as a photographer in my past, because things that signs, places which you couldn't get to before open access. And think that this approach, or the various approaches that we're sort of bringing to the table, could be truly transformative. Very hopeful that this is the work that's going to unlock the land so that we can start growing.
Thank you, Fran. Julian.
There we go. Put my video on just for this bit. So I'm Julian. I'm here representing iFarm. You may previously know me from my work with shared assets, having developed a prototype for Land Explorer, but Colm's joined the call, and Land Explorer has now sort of become part of Digital Commons. General interest in mapping, and from an iFarm perspective, we've used Land Explorer a lot, both to find access and manage the land and draw our plans, look at ownership around our lands, and also what farms might be neighbouring, because we want to really engage with the farming community. Our particular piece of land is about 10 acres. And in terms of mapping, I'm really interested in obviously the data that drives it. Probably extends beyond necessarily just food production, in terms of housing as well, and how we combine planning alongside food production, and really look at sort of local production and what's called agri-hoods. Particularly interested in the land available from local authorities, so brownfield, even contaminated brownfield, and sites for phytoremediation using plants like hemp. Yeah, that's probably a bit about me. As iFarm, we're hoping to become a sort of a member of the Digital Commons cooperative, multi-stakeholder cooperative, which looks at data. And as I say, I'm sure Colm will tell you more about that. We're sort of writing a case study on how we've used mapping and Land Explorer in particular for iFarm. And we're also writing some user stories based on sort of user-centered design for agile development, which incorporates a statement as a, planner, I need to do X so that I can, and I will know it and it's done when. And I'm kind of hopeful that kind of information would be helpful from a product development perspective. And there's also an international mapping hackathon being organized for October. So if anyone's got a particular project, a particular piece of open source code, or anything they'd like to write up for that, there's going to be a whole load of devs in about 4 weeks getting together to collaborate. The kind of things that I'm interested in, to give you an example, is contours for swales, drainage and ditches on our land. And we're really interested in using LiDAR. We've done some basic experiments ourselves in putting LiDAR on a drone and flying it over, and actually using that kind of technology, which the Ordnance Survey are using to map. They've now got, the Ordnance Survey now have a solar plane which can fly for about a month, and it uses LiDAR, so they're actually mapping other countries and stuff as well. So a very broad spectrum of interest and technical knowledge, and here really representing a community group. And again, as iFarm, there are lots of food land projects springing up all around the country, and we'd dearly love to map them and really engage with our local authorities' climate emergency plans and correlate the two in terms of resilience for housing, energy, agriculture and transport. And that all requires a map. You know, you don't know where you're going if you haven't got a map, and you don't know how you're doing if you're not measuring it. So really interested in soil health, carbon sequestration, air quality, water quality, and all of those kind of things.
Thank you, Julian. Loads in there. And how are you this morning?
I've got COVID, so I've been isolating, and I'm not very well, and I've had a really bad year. I've had shingles, I've had loads of viruses, loads of infections, so it's been a tough year really. So not great is the simple answer, but I'm here and I'm alive and I'm smiling, and actually I'm in the most beautiful place for isolating, although we don't have any running water, which is the biggest challenge. So I could be in a worse place. Thank you.
Healing places. Thank you, Julian. Yeah. I hope you get well soon.
Thank you.
Dan, to you. Just try and keep it shortish, but there's so much to talk about that we will come back to it after we've had Dan and Mott's presentations, because there's obviously lots of juicy things to talk about as well. How are you this morning, Dan?
Yeah, no, very good. And I'm another newbie to the group, so it's really great to see lots of new faces, and to hear about all this exciting collaborative activity, and the potential, I think, to find synergies between what we're doing, all the projects we're doing. So yeah, it's been a bit of a busy week for me. I've been on the road, so to speak, but back into Cranfield, where I live. I work at Cranfield University as a soil scientist. I've been at Cranfield now for just under a year on a fellowship, research fellowship. So you'll hear a little bit more about that in my short presentation later on today. But just wanted to say that I think this is a really incredible energy and vibe that we've got here. So I'm looking forward to also listening and absorbing, as Anne said gracefully earlier, all the wonderful things going on.
Brilliant, thank you. Mary.
Thanks, Maddie. Wow, it's just so great to be part of this group of people. It's really quite inspiring, all things that are going on. My name's Mary. I work for Friends of the Earth. I'm based in Bristol, and I run something called our Experiments program, which is basically our kind of innovation program. So my job is to come up with kind of ideas to solve some of our big kind of nature and climate challenges that we can kind of prototype or test at a small scale, and then kind of and then hopefully kind of expand or see where they go next. And that's kind of how I've got involved with this. A couple of projects going back a couple of years, I was working particularly on how we could find the land for tree cover, because we had a particular campaign around doubling tree cover. And that led to a couple of mapping projects which have kind of taken in this direction. One was a project that started local and turned into a national woodland opportunity map, which now covers England and Wales, and has been integrated into something called our Near Me tool, which is a tool we're developing for our activists right across the country, where you can kind of enter your postcode and it will pull up all the opportunities and all the things that both the best kind of around kind of energy, nature, transport, kind of basically what your priorities for action should be. And we're interested in kind of developing that further. So it's really interesting to hear about some of these other things might potentially, I'm thinking, how could some of these other things be integrated into that in the future, which is amazing, other data sets and so on. Another aspect of that project was the Hope Spots concept, which is, I'm so pleased to see how Mark is taking that forward in Lancaster. And I think Mark's going to tell you a bit more about that later, but it was basically about kind of integrating kind of opportunity initially for kind of tree cover, but kind of overlaying that with deprivation data. So we understood where the best opportunities for kind of community and nature regeneration are. And I suppose, I don't have any kind of, I haven't got any kind of really live projects in this area at the moment, but I'm very open to kind of hearing about new opportunities. And in particular, we are thinking quite actively about the next steps for something called our 10 times greener project, which was a kind of small scale urban greening project. Looking at how we could where we developed a kind of postcode gardener concept for that. Some of our postcode gardeners are thinking about very small micro kind of mapping opportunities. So I'm very interested to hear about whether there's scope for aligning with some of that. And also I've got good connections with I put something called the Land app, a guy called Tim Hopkin who runs that, which does a lot of farmland mapping. So yeah, I'm just really interested to kind of see where there are opportunities in the future and hear what everyone's doing, basically.
Wonderful, thank you. Colm, let's hear from you. Welcome.
Hi, yes, I'm Colin Massey. I'm stepping in for Kate from Shared Assets. So, but my main job at the moment is with Solidarity Economy Association. But we have recently kind of started a new cooperative called Digital Commons, which is bringing a project that we had on open data sharing and mapping for the co-op and solidarity economy movements, and the Land Explorer project from Shared Assets. So we're pulling these two mapping and data sharing platforms into one new multi-stakeholder cooperative, which we will use to sort of do quite a range of different mapping and data sharing services for movements like yours. And so to date, when we've done projects at different scales, kind of at the sort of international level with the International Cooperative Alliance, sort of publishing data about cooperatives around the globe, as well as very regional projects in Liverpool and Newcastle and Gateshead on helping local groups map their own solidarity economies. And what we're hoping to also do is kind of help sort of pull together projects for improving data standardization, because one of the problems with this kind of work is that people publish information about their food projects, their land projects in different standards, and it's very hard for that data to be reused by other projects with similar values. So that's a big part of what we like to do is help with sort of the data standard harmonization. Yeah, that's probably enough from me for now. I'm sitting in Oxford in a meanwhile space called Makespace in Oxford.
Thank you, Colin. Lovely to see you. That sounds really fascinating. I'm sure everyone's going, tell us more about that. Tell us more about that. I'm going to go to Gareth next, and then we'll end with you, Mark, and then you can just carry on diving into your piece from there. So, Gareth, are you still there? Do you want to introduce? Yes, you do.
Hi, folks. There we go. Yeah, hi, I'm Gareth, based in Sheffield. Work with Fran. I'm a co-founder of Regather, which is a community benefit society, and I'm also the coordinator of Chef Food, Sheffield's food partnership. And yeah, I'm very excited about the mapping aspects of the work. I sit on the core oversight group for the UAC, the Urban Agriculture Consortia, and it's just great to see all of these different threads of activity weaving together. And yeah, this is something I'd love to have more time to spend on, but right now I'm chasing some match funding from our local authority amongst other things. So that's why I'm listening in. So thanks ever so much, Maddie.
Great, thank you, Gareth. Thanks everybody. I'll pass over to you, Mark.
Thanks, Maddie, and good morning, everybody. I'm Mark Thurston. I'm a data scientist, and I've been in the kind of the food mapping field for well over 10 years now. The first kind of my first foray into it was in fact with Incredible Edible Somerset and a project called Food Mapper, where we were trying to identify through an internet platform, early Google Maps platform, sites suitable for food growing in Somerset, and then through that actually got involved with the Transition Network and worked with Rob Hopkins looking at something we called food footprinting for settlements in the southwest, and in particular for Totnes. That became part of it. It was published in the Transition Handbook. Since then, inevitably, had forays into different spaces, but always using spatial data science as the foundation of what I do. And it was a couple of years back that Mary and I met through Maddie, and we worked together on the Hope Spots project, which Mary's explained earlier, which was looking to identify locations suitable for the planting of trees in the Bristol and Bath green belt. The crucial thing about that is it's a very basic spatial data model, involved identifying potential locations for the successful planting of trees, but then also crucially relating them to the communities in their local environs. And we kind of agreed that this application and this modelling approach had application in different areas. And when Rachel Marshall of the Urban Project at the University of Lancaster approached us, we saw there's a great opportunity to take this model and transform it and tweak it and help them in their project, which is looking to identify locations, land parcels suitable for urban and peri-urban food growing, both in terms of social, in terms of community and social orientated community growing, but also crucially for some commercial opportunities as well for small scale growers. So I'm not unfortunately able just now to show you any Hope Spots maps. We're very close to getting those, so I think the next time we'll be able to give you a full presentation. But I thought it'd be really helpful to talk about some of the issues that we've encountered when looking at mapping or identifying land parcels suitable for food mapping in this context, and just how much time we've had to spend in terms of pulling data together from different sources and really evaluating those sources for their suitability, not only for this particular project, but crucially for how this methodology could be applied in different areas. So one of the key foundations for this project is the idea that the methodology, which is open source anyway from previously from Friends of the Earth, but that it can be applied anywhere in the country. So in a sense, that means that we're looking as far as possible to drive the model from open source data. So for example, looking to identify those spaces that may be useful or may be applicable for food, for growing food. We're kind of looking at two key data sets as our main underpinning of that. One is the OS green space data, and the other is the agricultural land classification. Now, those of you involved in any form of food mapping probably come across those, and there are a couple of things that I think are important to mention about them. One is that neither of them have really been designed to identify locations for food. Even the agricultural land classification doesn't really give us sufficient detail in terms of suitability of land for the growing of food, really. One of the major problems with that data set is it is very small scale, so very large scale. So it means that we're not actually able to see. It's very generalized, it's very non-specific, and the ability to identify small land parcels is problematic. So it gives us more of a broad brush approach for the potential for the identification of food growing locations. Now, we use this in the Friends of the Earth Hope Spots project, looking at growth of trees. But in a sense, that was more applicable because some of the areas that we were looking for were going to be larger anyway. In contrast, the Ordnance Survey open green space data enables us to drill in much more on smaller land parcels, which arguably are potentially more manageable for food production, particularly from a community perspective, and crucially also gives us insight to what's happening in the urban areas. I mean, the other key problem with the agricultural land classification is that one of the land classifications is urban. So we just see these big splodges of built up areas. And what we're obviously interested in this project, and I think a lot of our projects, is driving into the urban area and looking more closely at smaller areas, neighbourhoods and so forth, and what opportunities there may be from that particular data set. So we've got a very coarse data set, a very fine data set, the fine data set concentrated in the urban areas, the coarse data outside the urban areas, and obviously one of the challenges is merging them together. Now, the great thing about these data sets is that they're open source. But because they're not really geared to what we're looking for, we have encountered problems, and this is something we're looking at quite carefully. And my colleague Rachel Marshall, who lives in Lancaster, I'm in the West Country, so I must confess I'm not that familiar with the Lancaster geography. But she's been looking very closely, particularly the Ordnance Survey green space data, which in a sense offers us opportunities to look at what's going on inside the urban areas, and comparing that with some data that we've been able to get from Lancaster City Council. And what's striking is why there's overlap. There's also a lot of areas in the Lancaster green space data, it's a green and blue infrastructure data set, which they've been working on and will be publishing very, very shortly. There's overlap, but there are also, substantial areas in both data sets that aren't represented in the other one. So we've got a question there about the whole issue of ground truthing. So how accurate are both these data sets? And naturally, we will be drawn to looking at the council data, because it's informed by local knowledge, arguably a lot more than the green space data, which is generated from national mapping and remote, I believe, remote sensing sources as well. Which then starts to open a bit of a not necessarily a can of worms, but there are certain considerations that we have to have then in terms of how we can develop a structure, a modelling structure, modelling framework and approach that can be applied anywhere in the country. And I was struck by what Colm said on the Shared Assets project about looking for data standards. I mean, I presume some of that is data standards in terms of formatting and the way the data are prepared. But it also does start to suggest that we don't have that kind of comprehensive national data set that we might wish, in order for us to get a kind of comprehensive national picture. Because I think inevitably what we're going to have to do on the urban project, and what other similar projects are going to have to do, is to engage with the local authority. Now, as soon as you start engaging with the local authority, I mean, that's fantastic, and that's really what we want to do. But those standards, in terms of the way in which we can identify growing locations, won't be constant, won't be consistent. And if we are to lobby for the right to grow, for example, then there is going to be a requirement for some pretty good statistics and information that can be robustly defended in order to push this sort of thing through. So I think there's an interesting question here in terms of what national data sets we can apply. And then if we take that as a base level, how we can integrate other data sets into that framework in a way which is defensible and in a way in which we can start to pull out meaningful information to support other endeavours in this space. So that's the first challenge, and obviously what we've been doing is looking at the different data sets and how they give us different pictures. You then start to look at the peri-urban areas and the urban periphery, and you're then arguably running up against more problems in terms of the coarseness of the agricultural land data set, and really we start to miss some important local nuance that would enable us to identify particularly safe small-scale commercial production sites that are, in terms of market gardening and so forth, which would be appropriate. So that kind of leads us on to the next. Sorry, I don't want to say this is just full of problems, but inevitably, as you start drilling into something like this, you do encounter many issues. So to try and understand the peri-urban area a bit more, when we look at Lancaster, basically, according to the agricultural land classification, it's all pretty poor. It's grade 3 and grade 4 land, basically almost for the whole of the district. And of course, what that hides is topography, aspect, lots of different things that we probably could get a handle on. But crucially, we have no soils information. Now, there is a soils data set available nationally, but it costs. And that then presents us with another problem, which is access to really useful data that we have to pay for. And because we're in an interesting space on the Urban project, because obviously as a university, the University of Lancaster has some access to some of these data sets, either for free or at a reduced fee, but nonetheless that presents a barrier. So I mentioned the soils data. Another crucial thing for this project is understanding ownership, and I'm sure we all know what the deal is with the land registry, and how that kind of precludes a lot of. I believe it precludes a lot of really important projects because we've got no idea who owns the land. Now, that takes it's a brief tangent to kind of go back to the work we did with Incredible Edible Somerset back in about 2007. We tried to get a sense of using local knowledge because the land registry at that time the data wasn't accessible. And we tried to get that through local knowledge and try to maintain a data set. But that proved very, very problematic in terms of not only motivating the crowdsourcing and keeping that going, but also the whole kind of question of verification and so forth, and actually building that sort of data asset was problematic. So my personal view is that then we need to find a way to unlock access to some of these data sets that were built with taxpayers' money and yet are not being made accessible, not only to community groups or other interested parties, but also arguably to local authorities, to universities, and so on. So in a sense, what we were almost talking about is a multi-level model, depending on what access to what data you can get, whether you have funding, for example, to once you've identified potential locations, to perhaps go to the land registry site and get the red line data, whether it's to get information on the soils and that would similarly help decision making about the viability, the economic viability, the social viability of these potential locations. So that's the kind of identifying the locations and some of the issues we've discovered there, and we are looking to see whether we can maybe produce one or two models to show the difference and just show how that applying this nationally or applying this in other parts of the country, there are problems, and as long as you're aware of them, then you can take that into account. In terms of the other aspect of the HopeSpots methodology, which was looking at the social dimension, arguably that's a bit more straightforward, because a lot of the data sets are based on the census. They're government data sets. So, for example, the IMD index of multiple deprivation, looking at that at a fairly coarse level, looking at that really at LSOA, which is about 1,000 households. That's useful, but again, there's always that whenever you start using those data sets, what you've got to recognise is there's a coarseness in there, which may not be necessarily as appropriate to apply to some small scale food growing locations. Another thing that we've been working on in this project is actually looking at food deserts, food poverty, and actually trying to develop a quick and dirty methodology to identify food deserts using the food hygiene certificate data set from government, and we're having some success with that. I mean, it's not going to be an all singing and all dancing model, but will rather give us an indication of what parts of Lancaster district are in food deserts relative to other parts. But again, what's interesting about that is that there's been quite a lot of cleaning has to be done on that data set. Again, it's a data set that's been designed for something completely different that we're piggybacking on, and we're manipulating it and looking at it to see if we can model where food poverty locations exist in these urban areas. One other thing that I think is also very interesting and kind of gets tied up in this really interesting data you could get if you could pay for it, but we have been able to get access to because of Lancaster University, is some of the historical ordnance survey maps that are hosted by Digimap. Now, what we've concentrated on there is looking at locations within the district that were previously allotments and also glass houses. So going through basically it's old paper maps that have just been put online as an image from the 1890s up to the 1950s, and actually trying to track where the allotments were, which ones are still around, and also crucially, because we are thinking about this the issue of commercial food production, where the old market gardens used to be, and the only way we can really tell that is by the location of glass houses. So you can imagine that we have gone and digitized that manually, which has taken a lot of time. We've still got a bit of data cleaning on that. But I'll tell you what's really striking is, oh gosh, how many allotments there used to be, and how few allotments there are now, and how many market gardens there used to be, and how few there are now. And obviously what's helpful for us there is almost through the back door, again, using a data set in a slightly different way, is to identify those locations that may actually be really suitable for food production because they were used for food production in the past. But I don't know exactly where we are with that with respect to the licensing, because Rachel's liaising with Digimap at the moment, just finding out, I suppose, a bit of the ownership question. Here we've manually digitized some data. Can we even publish it? Well, we probably can publish it in an academic publication, but can we publish it, for example, on a website showing how things have changed through time? So, as in all spatial data projects, and in fact, arguably, in my experience, any data project, about 80% of your time, and it's the old 80-20 rule, but 80% of the time is spent on data gathering and data collection. And what it really brought home to me, which I'm not surprised about, is how we're having to use data sets that weren't designed for what we're using, and that's kind of you've got to kind of run with that and roll with those particular punches. but also how trying to create a national approach, or an approach that could be used nationally in an open source sort of way, is problematic because of the resolution of the data, the fact that some of the data sets are partial, the fact that you really do need to start looking for local authority support, but then you run into the whole issue of standards and comparability across local authority areas. And then also some of these fantastic data sets that are held often out with the Ordnance Survey open mapping provision, which would be incredibly useful. And yet, for whatever reason, even though they were originally very much in the public domain, are not in the public domain anymore, which to a greater or lesser degree compromise the project, and therefore will compromise the outputs of the project, because we'll have a partial view. Notwithstanding, I'm still quite positive. It's a really good project. It's going to produce some really interesting results. I've got no doubt about that. But I also think it's an opportunity for us to kind of flag some of the issues that I'm sure could be addressed with imagination and lobbying and a lot of determination. Thank you.
It's amazing, Mark. Thank you so much. You're clearly, thinking very sort of systemically and doing a lot of the kind of preparatory work that will benefit all of the projects that sort of proliferate from here, identifying what the challenges and barriers are for all mapping. And there's some really, there's some significant and huge problems. And I suppose there's an interesting question there about what can be solved locally and what needs to be properly dealt with nationally, really. And on, I'd just like to welcome Jess. Hello, Jess. And then it'd be great to have, we're just checking with time, we're at 10 to 11. So then I'd really like to hold a space for everybody to comments or feedback or questions for Mark on anything that comes up, and then maybe for 10 minutes, and then we'll go to Dan to talk about your project. Do you want to just quickly introduce yourself, Jess, and then we'll go into be thinking about any questions that you've got for Mark?
Yeah, sure. So Mark, I only just caught the end of what you were saying there. But so hello everyone. If I've not met some people before, I've recognised most people, but I'm a professor of sustainability at Lancaster University in the Environment Centre, so background in environmental science. I lead a project where we're looking at the environmental well-being and resilience benefits of local food growing in cities. And this has led with Rachel to this HopeSpots project and Mark. And Mark, I was just frantically typing because I was going to put it in the chat rather than disturb people that, I've been speaking to Rach about the problems you've been encountering with sort of what we're sort of privileged to access in university and in the council system compared to what's completely open. And I think it'll be interesting to do that contrast using the completely open data and show more a difference it makes. But I've started that lobbying as well. So last week I went to a big conversation on empowering local leaders to create nature positive places. And so there were DEFRA representatives, sort of led by DEFRA, another company leading it for DEFRA, and just trying to get that message through about open data is really important in this process. And I think it's starting to be looked at this local authority level from a national perspective and what needs to change at that level. So I think it's really good timing for some of these thoughts to come forward. So I'm positive.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jess. So over to you guys for anything you want to raise in relation to what Mark's been talking about. any questions or responses.
A very quick question. I'm really interested in what data you are able to extract from the food hygiene certificate. Are you looking for types of takeaways or greasy spoons, or what is it that you're using?
Well, any place that serves food has to have a food hygiene certificate, and it's remarkable once you look at it. The full range of outlets, from schools and colleges through to greasy spoons, through to supermarkets and so forth. So yes, we will be looking at takeaways, and there's some work that's been done by the University of Liverpool, which looks to kind of try and classify food outlets in terms of what they call healthfulness, which we're having a quick dig into to see how easy that will be to map across from the hygiene data, because it's not being generated for our purpose, but that there are gaps, and again, it's kind of local knowledge becomes important. But certainly, what we will be looking for is, where the locations of supermarkets and greengrocers and other sort of traditional food outlets are, as well as looking at where takeaways are, and looking at the degree to which there is a spatial difference between those distributions. And unfortunately, I'm expecting that we will find that there will be some gaps in the provision of healthy food or access to healthy food in certain neighbourhoods in Lancaster and Morecambe, and maybe and actually also crucially beyond into some of the rural areas where there are smaller settlements, but again they have to travel much further to get access to food as well. So jury's still out on how we can do it, but I think if we make a first stab, what it will do is open, and obviously publish the approach. It gives us a foundation on which to build moving forward, and pull together knowledge from other people.
Thanks, Colin, and then Jane.
Yeah, Mark, that was great that you've touched on. I think there's nothing you've said that doesn't touch on similar problems that we are looking at or wanting to help solve. So it's really, really great to hear what you've been doing. And one of the kind of solutions that we're looking at is kind of, I guess it's an interim, or where if we ideally kind of a lot of this data would be published under sort of proper open licenses, but where it isn't, if as a cooperative we could license it, but then because the intention is to be a multi-stakeholder cooperative, so projects that basically need access to that data could join the cooperative, and then we sort of share the costs, whatever licensing costs there would be, through a membership. Well, we share the cost somehow, but then the access is given to all the members of the cooperative. So that's kind of one of the ways we're thinking of getting around the problem where the licensing isn't open.
That sounds a really interesting idea, particularly because some of these data sets, the way that the licenses are structured, that if you are using them in any sort of commercial setting, and that would include, say, for example, a cooperative food production outfit in a particular location, you may have to pay twice. You may have to pay for the kind of the overall intelligence, and then pay again because it's being used commercially for a specific project or a specific location. But I think the idea of a cooperative that people, organisations join into to get access to that data is really interesting. And I'm just immediately thinking, so how would the existing licenses try and prevent that? Because obviously the owners of the data, wherever possible, are trying to monetize and maximize the money that they can get from these data sets. So a really interesting idea, and worth looking into a lot more.
Do you want to come back on that, Colin, or I mean, it's a bigger conversation for maybe our next get together. We can sort of dive deeper into.
Sadly, the internet didn't. I was probably making faces. The internet wasn't working. I didn't quite hear most of what Mark was saying. It's a bit frustrating, but I did get the last bit. Yes, that there will be kind of probably pushback, and if this was very successful, you can see kind of the owners of the licenses actually trying to find a way to sort of restrict it. But yeah, so that it's not guaranteed to work, but might work for some data sets, but not for others.
Yes, I think you're right.
Thank you. Janie.
I was just going to say, in fact, I was trying to look for it whilst we were talking. About 5 years ago, there was a lot of work done in Lambeth on food deserts. And I'm going to try and find it to see what the different kind of criteria were. That's not the right word. What is it, Mark? You know?
No, that's fine.
Because I think that might be quite interesting to see what they picked out. What were the things they picked out to identify the food deserts? And it was very stark that the areas of deprivation were completely linked. But I'll try and find that and share that with people.
That'd be brilliant. Thank you.
Quite a good map.
Julian. It'll be the last point, and then we'll move on to Dan.
Yeah, I just want to say thanks, Mark. Really fascinating. We're currently looking at space to plant trees, and the funders want ordnance survey coordinates and this kind of thing for specific planting. And just want to touch on those open data standards from local authorities, because they are bound to publish things like brownfield sites annually. But an annual publication is about as good as a picture of a traffic light. You don't know if it's still green. So having linked open data with APIs, so for live is really important. And if it's helpful at all, I have some contacts with Gateshead Council who went through a process of mapping fast food outlets in relation to proximity to schools and other areas, and they actually changed their planning because they had a problem with obesity and diabetes. So they actually changed their planning and closed fast food outlets in particular areas that actually had they measured the outcomes and had some significant benefits. So I know Gateshead are particularly forward thinking in that perspective. So if it's helpful at all, I can put you in touch.
Please do. Thank you very much.
Cheers.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thanks all. Thank you, Mark.
Pleasure.
Brilliant. Look forward to seeing the maps and when it all comes together. That'd be great. Dan, do you want to step in and talk about your work in Newcastle?
Yeah, thank you, Maddie. And if I don't know, I don't mind if someone could keep their audio on. That helps my headphones, because they turn off if there's nothing coming in, which is a perennial issue with virtual working at the moment. There couldn't have been a better agenda here, Maddie, really, because I used to live in Lancaster for 3 to 4 years. I did my PhD. In fact, with Jess Davies at Lancaster University. And shortly after that, I joined as a postdoc on the Urban Revolution project. So I'm very familiar with that project, with the Lancaster town, the kind of topography of the area, some of the local growing initiatives. In fact, I was only there a couple of days ago, in fact, so it's still fresh in my mind. And having walked around Lancaster for a couple of hours across the last couple of days, I see there's lots of areas that could benefit from urban growing and community growing initiatives. So specifically, the point Mark actually raised earlier touched on the kind of soils data of the surrounding area, and he's quite right that there is a national soil data set. There are a number of them, but one of them is held coincidentally by Cranfield, where I am currently employed in. So we have the National Soil Resource Inventory, and we have quite extensive data on soils, physical, chemical, biological, hydrological. So although I can't set the soil data free, thanks Jess, there could be potential collaborations there, and we've done this before with projects where we've linked up, so there is a possibility there. The other thing I wanted to say is the My Soil app, which you may not have heard of. It's because of I think Android/Apple app, which is a public called community, almost citizen science project, whereby farmers, growers have sent in data, upload data to a map. And I'm not sure, I've not been on it recently, but I believe that it did include urban areas as well. So although it's typically kind of rural, agricultural farms, there is data for back gardens, residential gardens and things. So that might be another way of accessing some data, although it's obviously not as rigorous as the data set collected by Cranfield. It's really great to be here and invited by Maddie to talk about, I guess, what you could call a kind of spin out from the urban revolution. I parted ways with Lancaster, but still kind of keep in contact with Jess and the Urban Project. But what I want to talk about this morning is some ideas which kind of evolved out of that, and kind of merged with also some of my own personal research interests as well. I don't know whether, Maddie, you could, assuming you're the host of the call, whether you could allow screen sharing, because I have a couple of slides, not many at all, but just wanted to put something on the screen, just for diversity's sake, I suppose, in the call. So yeah, I don't know if you can all see that. Yeah, thank you, Maddie. So yeah, I wanted to talk about this project really, modelling, optimising and identifying novel sites for urban food production. This is a Science and Technologies Facilities Council, which is one of the UKRI, UK Research and Innovation Research Councils, and specifically a project which was funded out of a sandpit that I attended, run by the STFC Food Network. So it's a specific sound. It was a specific sandpit focused on food production generally, and also urban food production quite specifically. But a little about me then. So I'm, as I said, just in my short introduction, a research fellow and soil scientist at Cranfield University within the Soil and Agri-Food Institute. And my personal research interests are on soil formation, and particularly the kind of the building block materials from which soil is formed. Soil scientists often call these parent materials. My vision, in a sense, is to safeguard these parent materials to safeguard future soils, future soil formation. So a lot of soil scientists are invested in the soils that we have now. I'm interested in that, but I'm also interested in thinking about our future soil, the soils of tomorrow. And one of the core themes kind of coming out, and I should say for those not familiar, a research fellowship is quite a broad multi-package piece of work. So there's lots of themes that are kind of under this umbrella, one of which here is ways in which we could accelerate soil formation. And that brings me to kind of a question in the urban space, which is, how can we form and maintain healthy functioning soils in urban spaces? And what could the opportunities be? And of course, one of the opportunities is that we can grow healthy, nutritious food and sustainable food for towns and cities. So although this has a very soil kind of focused and background, it's brought out of this interest that I have in urban space, which is being catalysed, I guess, by the Urban Revolution project, my involvement with that, and also the things I've learned from that project, which I'll touch upon in a second. So I guess, the question is why vacant spaces in the title? And I won't, because we're preaching to the converted here, I won't talk about how urban spaces can help transform food production. We know it can. But I think it's quite interesting that we've often looked at conventional urban growing spaces, so allotments, community gardens or community allotment projects. But virtually no knowledge has been kind of garnered about the potential of these vacant, underutilized spaces for food production. And only the last couple of days, I checked into a hotel just out in Preston, just outside Preston town centre, and my window overlooked one such potential site, which was this rooftop where you can see buddleias coming out, but not much else. And this is just one of the ideas or one of the examples of a vacant or underutilized space within a town and city. But there's others, including multi-story car parks with kind of park and ride schemes. One wonders what the function of these, very large multi-story car parks will be in the future. Underground spaces as well, vacant lots, construction sites, spaces in kind of transition from one function to another. And there's reasons why we might want to look at these vacant spaces, and not only does it kind of reduce the burden on existing growing sites, so allotments have got very long waiting lists at the moment, but it also allows us to green more urban spaces. And this kind of touches back on some work I did with the Urban Revolution project, which is to do a thorough review of the ecosystem functions that are delivered by different types of green space and urban agriculture space within towns and cities. And we know that it's not just about creating food, it's about creating safe and healthy environments, whether that's water regulation, air quality regulation, microclimate, biodiversity, carbon sequestration. All of these can almost the byproducts of doing this. And then finally, spreading the risk of disruption. Of course, if an allotment falls victim to an issue, and it has to be closed, or it has to be perhaps it's renovated into another function, or it's taken down. By spreading growing across the city and across the town, we can minimize that disruption, and that's kind of looks at what Jess was saying a minute ago about resilience in urban spaces. So there is a sense of kind of trying to bolster that resilience by looking at other areas. So in a nutshell then, and this really will be a nutshell because I think discussion's probably the order of the day rather than just talk. This is a sandpit kind of proof of concept project, which we're basing in Newcastle, and there's a couple of reasons for that, which I'll go into in a minute. We want to know out of this project which vacant spaces in towns and cities would be most suitable for food production, for urban agriculture. And so there's a number of kind of steps or kind of key milestones that need to be arrived at to do this. So the first is, well, what do we mean by vacant urban spaces? I've listed a couple of examples, and I showed you a photograph of one, maybe a crude example outside a Travelodge window. But there are other spaces, and we need really to do a systematic review of what these vacant urban spaces might be. So we want to create a typology of vacant spaces, and we aim to do that through a literature review, which is kind of a classic academic sense of getting an eye of the land, combined with some satellite mapping of what these spaces might be. And then we want to go to Newcastle, and we want to identify where or which of these vacant spaces and where do they occur in the city. And there's a reason for that, and that's because what we then plan to do is to take a short list of these and deploy sensors in partnership with the Newcastle Urban Observatory. And Newcastle Urban Observatory is part of a number of cities across the UK which have been given money or given, you know, funding and resources to deploy a number of different types of sensors which collect the data about a number of kind of environmental and social variables, often environmental, but others. And there's a few here, if you can see, kind of water quality, sewage, soil, traffic, noise, air quality. So all of these sensors are already deployed. And so in kind of partnership with the Urban Observatory here, we plan to move some of these sensors, but also try to make use of the data sets because they are quite extensive data sets on kind of hourly timescales for most of them. And we want to collect the data for these vacant spaces. So that includes microclimate data, soils data, air quality data, social data if we can get it. And what we then ultimately want to get out of all this is to put these data together and build a decision-making platform to assess each vacant space, give it almost like a scorecard in terms of multiple criteria, environmentally, which are the best spaces, in terms of accessibility, which are the best spaces, in terms of, you know, potential for communities to become involved, you know, what are the spaces which will be best for urban agriculture, and using kind of a weighted analysis, which we're kind of yet to work on, develop. We want to, you know, find the best spaces, the compromise, I guess, between all of these different criteria. And then finally, my final slide is in terms of kind of follow-up work, and we know that this is, you know, one of many projects currently going on in the UK and also around the world looking at this. Personally, I'd be interested in going to some of these vacant spaces, underutilized areas, and working with communities to not only cultivate their interest and passion and energy and knowledge at the end of the day of urban agriculture, but growing the soils that will be the first step to creating healthy food. So local resources, composting. Maddie showed me a brilliant example of a compost scheme down in Sussex, which is really inspiring. Circular economy is very important here. And then kind of seeking the synergies and working with other projects. And I guess that's my final line really here, is that I'd be really interested to hear from you and as many of you as possible over the next few months to find where we can build synergies. And that's not necessarily just about, you know, avoiding duplicating effort, but it also means that we can create something which is greater than the sum of our parts. So I'll hand over back to Maddie, and the headphones will turn on again at some point. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. That's brilliant. I'm sure if your brains are probably like mine, like really like weaving all these things together, and it's you know, it's not my area of expertise, and so it's like it's really kind of making my head explode in a good way. But there's clearly a lot of potential lines of synergy and of cooperative working, and I think the role of this community in this group is to kind of go on a journey together, and let's think about it in terms of, you know, what do we do together over the coming year plus to weave the things that need to be woven and share what is growing, what is emerging, and to try and see what is trying to emerge in that sort of the system that we're in. So I'd love to just open it out to you all again for questions, thoughts for Dan. Really fascinating work, Dan. Thank you. Jeremy, I'll start with you.
Yeah, just mention for those of you who weren't in the Northern Real Farming Conference event yesterday, there was a good presentation by Jill Edmondson from Sheffield University about her work on plotting land in and around Sheffield that might be used for food growing. I don't know what data set she used, but it would be probably worth all of you checking in with her. When the recording of that session is available, we can forward it round, but you probably all know Jill Edmondson, or some of you will anyway. Cheers.
Yeah. Sorry, I was on mute. Yes, Colin, go for it.
Hi, Dan. Yeah, so we've worked with a group called the Newbridge Project in Newcastle Gateshead for a few years now, working with them on, they call it the For Solidarity Project, which is about sort of, well, part of it is about mapping the solidarity economy in that region. And I would imagine that one of the data sets which would be useful for you to combine with the sort of the sensor data is where are the local community projects that actually live near or are active near those vacant sites. So, and one of the visions for our work is basically to publish data about projects like this in a manner which makes it fit into kind of research projects and what we would call actually brokering projects, where basically you're putting different things together by doing searches across multiple different types of data sets. So I think the Newbridge Project, their work is sort of meanwhile space, so that they operate creating kind of community art spaces in sort of peri-urban and urban areas to make use of space that basically is available for a while. It may not kind of is between development phases. So there's lots of overlap there with your work.
Yeah, thank you, Colm. That's really interesting to hear. And as I said, I mean, I didn't put the dates of the project. We've only just launched the project, so we're just kind of launching into action, trying to bring as many of the stakeholders that would be interested in this and also project partners together. That would be really interesting to hear more about, and we can, I can hopefully contact you about that in the near future, because I think that would be a really useful addition to this data set. And I think is a really important part. I mean, community is so important here, because when we leave, when the science is done, when the research has come to a conclusion, the funding has disappeared, we really want to sustain, transformative action in these spaces, and that requires willingness, an educated community. So we have this kind of gap now to educate and to inspire, and then hopefully that will lead to some real on the ground change. Yeah.
Fran, then Julian.
Hi, Dan. Yes. So when you're developing your typology of vacant spaces, do you have any thoughts on what is too small to not be worth mapping? Because this is one of the questions that I grapple with. What size of land is appropriate, and what size of land should we just discount? Is that part of your criteria, or?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, how long is a piece of string? How short is a piece of string? That will come into it, and I think there's a number of things here. I think the first of which will be kind of a broad scale analysis of just which spaces there are, and I hope that the review will be able to get some quantitative data out of that. So not only are we listing qualitatively the different spaces within urban environments, but we're also getting some data on size, potentially on location, on resources around those spaces as well. And of course, as you mentioned, it's important to bring acreage into that. So hopefully we can get some data on acreage, and that hopefully also be able to be supported by some mapping as well. So once we know qualitatively that long list of long list of spaces, we can go train GIS to find these spaces in the environment and obtain some actual data, empirical data of the spaces, of the acreage of these sites. So yeah, I mean, that's a very important point. And I guess ultimately it comes to this question: are we trying to grow more food or healthy food, or both? Because you know, what's worse? We could do 3 acres of pretty poor nutritious food, or we could have 1 acre which is, you know, really healthy and nutritious, and that's that may well be something to weigh up in that process.
Thanks, Julian. And then there's also a question from Mary relating to the social dimension as well.
Thanks, Dan. Really exciting work on soil health, because it's really important. In support of what Colm said, again, I've got contacts at Gateshead. They would probably be very interested. There's some community growing projects, so you could add some contacts in support of that. We've also opened a dialogue with Redbridge Borough Council, who are again interested in sort of peri-urban food development and post-COVID economic regeneration and this kind of thing. Mostly based around a 40,000 square foot warehouse in Ilford, which is a climate emergency centre, which is one of these kind of meanwhile projects that Colm mentioned. And the climate emergency centre network, they've got 10 now set up and another 27 in the pipeline, and they're currently all urban environments. So you know, that would be a great network to actually kind of promote this kind of stuff through. With Redbridge, they have 2,000 acres of greenbelt and significant amounts of brownfield as well. And when you're looking at soil health, obviously the brownfield sites may be contaminated, or there's a reason there's brownfield. So when you look at phytoremediation, obviously improving that quality and actually transforming that land into somewhere that can grow food. From an iFarm perspective, we'd love to start measuring our soil health and improvement. So I'm wondering to what degree, you know, the hardware or software is available to actually for us to do that, you know, stick something in the ground, measure stuff, crowdsource data, and in particular improvements in terms of carbon sequestration. How is it improving? And we're really engaging with our local farming community because we're right in the heart of rural East Anglia. So we're surrounded by farms. And so we're having these conversations with farmers about their soil health and the inputs that they use and how they can reduce the inputs and actually improve the microbiome and all of these kind of things, and hold fixed nitrogen and all of these kind of things. So I'd be really interested in how we can crowdsource that data from a network of farmers and a network of peri-urban or urban centres to actually add to that mapping, so we can measure and display stuff. So love further conversations.
Thank you so much, Julian. There was lots there and lots to digest. It was really informative. I'm really excited to hear about the warehouses, and you know, this taps into this idea that you know, urban environments are almost unique in the sense they have these indoor spaces. And with the indoor space, there's maybe greater capacity, not always ability, but a capacity to grow things all the year round. So in kind of climates where we're driven by seasons, especially in the UK, where you know, that potentially also enhances our resilience. And I think the other thing to say on that idea about soil health, and there is a lot of work going on at the moment about trying to constrain what we mean by soil health, but also trying to get communities involved in measuring and monitoring more of our soils, because we know that we can't go out as scientists to each and every field, and we know that the kind of conventional model of farmers sending samples to commercial labs is no longer efficient. So there's lots of things going on around that. The MySoil app is that I mentioned earlier is maybe one of the first to do this, but there are much more developments in this area. And I think over time, in the next 3 to 5 years, I believe that there will be you know, more opportunities, more kind of citizen science engagement opportunities to get farmers and growers to kind of send their data into the public domain. So kind of watch this space, Julian, I guess, in this sense. But yeah, happy to take that up also on an individual call as well.
Wonderful. Thanks all. I'm just really conscious of time. We've got 2 minutes left, and we could talk for a long time more, but we'll just have to kind of press pause on it. Does anyone have to shoot off at exactly past? Okay, thank you. I'd really like to get a sense of just how we kind of take the group forward in terms of how often we come together and how we communicate with each other. You know, is there a platform that this group needs to be able to share, you know, that isn't an email, endless email threads or a WhatsApp group? There's what's the optimum way that we can share all this information and ideas and images and so on. Have a think about that. It's been about 2 months, I suppose, since we first met, so we were imagining it sort of being every couple of months. Obviously November is super busy with everyone kind of being COP focused and fallout from COP focused. There's a lot of talk about local authorities as well and about their role in this piece of work. So I'd also be really interested in where are the open doors in local authorities, the people who can bring a local authority perspective to help shape the work in terms of what local authorities need and can offer and that sort of thing. So it'd be good to share any thoughts you have on that. And other aspects is obviously I'd love to hear more about. Janie's talked a bit about a platform called Gather, which might be an interesting space where all of the different mapping tools, methodologies, approaches, projects could be brought together, and it's an information sharing sort of site, I think, and maybe next time we can hear more about that as well, so that the work becomes more and more visible and more accessible. So are there any sort of final thoughts? We'll share the video and share the chat and stuff that comes through, and I can see that things like Griffin's Citizen Soil Science project has been flagged, and various other things. Is there any sort of final thoughts? Maybe we'll send out, I'll kind of put a bit of that I've been saying into an email or something, so we can sort of pool our thoughts while they're all fresh on how we take this forward in the best way and what you all need and want from this community. Thank you, Jess. Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, so Lancaster might be a good one to bring in because they're really involved and positive about the hope spots. Yeah, great.
Also talking to Cornwall at the moment, working with Cornwall on a soils project, soils and development. So if some of the conversation is sort of in that region, then they might be interested. Yeah.
Great, thank you. And Mary.
Thanks, Maddie. My feeling, having kind of listened to all these conversations, there's just so much in here. I'm kind of frantically typing to try and kind of keep up with everybody's kind of ideas and references, and it feels really rich for I wonder if this, I'm just thinking in my head, I wonder if there's scope for bringing something a bit bigger together just to share some more of this knowledge and learning. I don't know if that's like more of a sort of a day's worth of workshops or something like that, where you could really gather it. It's just a thought in my head, because I think it seems to me one thing that's unique about this space is that kind of interface between the kind of the grassroots community based, whether that's Janie or whoever, and the sort of the chef food and whatever, and the academic, which feels quite unusual to me and really productive and really rich. So, I don't know whether that would be duplication, something that's out there already, but I feel like I could listen to a lot more of this, and I'm sure other people could. So I just want to kind of throw that idea out there. And I wondered whether just in your follow-up, Maddie, whether just some sort of really quick survey, like, a quick kind of Google form survey, something about actually what do people need, what could they offer, might be a way of gathering some of that intelligence.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you. It's difficult to stop, isn't it? But we must. And yeah, we'll do a follow-up, and it'd be great to, maybe we can create just also some sort of Google Doc, so if anyone wants to just share any of their, I think a survey is a really good idea, but also to try and capture, or maybe in that survey we try and capture the sort of key things that have emerged out of today. So yeah, just thank you very much to all of you, and to Mark and Dan for coming and sharing your brilliant projects. And yeah, we'll definitely hear more about all of them. Thank you for all of the things that have sparked the weaving to start happening between the different projects and people, and all your amazing work. So see you all next time. Carry it forward. Nice one. Thanks, everyone.
See you later, everyone.
Good, Maddie.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Yes.